right.
What were y'all doing this afternoon? Did y'all have sports or something?
Yeah, practice.
Which?
Lacrosse.
Lacrosse, lax. Golf.
All right, we ready? Everyone ready? All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another What's Next meeting. I appreciate you guys taking your time out of your busy week to come and listen. We're lucky to have Mr. Tarkenton here with us tonight, a former sports writer, sports anchor, and sports director. Mr. Tarkenton is a member of the Virginia Sports Hall of Fame and now works as a substitute teacher here at St. Chris. We are lucky for him to be here with us tonight, and we appreciate him taking the time out of his schedule to meet with us. So with that being said, please join me in welcoming Chip Tarkenton. To start, you got into the communication business when you were only 15. What sparked your interest and what did you do?
You know, I always liked being involved in something. And first, it's good. Thanks for coming tonight, everybody, by the way. I appreciate you being here, and hope you'll have a good time with this, because that's what we're here to do. But 15, I had an opportunity to go sit on a radio station and spin disc records. And guys, y'all won't know a lot of those, but they're vinyl. And you used to play records, disc jockey. So as soon as I walked in there, I got the bug. I mean, immediately. And so that led me to know, wow, maybe this is something I want to do down the road. And it turned out to be a lot of fun and a lot of ups and downs and a lot of great rides.
So later you attended the University of Georgia. How did you decide to go to Georgia, and why did you decide to get into speech communications?
Well, a couple of reasons. I went to the University of Georgia. I'd grown up in Athens and Atlanta. I spent the last 2 years of my high school in Atlanta, and went to Western Carolina on a half football, half track scholarship. And I'd played quarterback almost my entire life, so I didn't know a lot of other positions. But when I got to Western Carolina, they decided to move me to a different position, which they called a cat back, which was like a little flanker back, but you had to block a lot. And as you can tell, I'm not a very imposing figure to be blocking anybody. So within about the first week or so, I busted my knee pretty bad, and I went to see the head coach, and I said, I can't play here. And he goes, you're right, you can't. And I'm thinking, well, why in the world did I get signed to come up here? And he said, we don't expect you to play this year. We're going to redshirt you. He said, you won't play next year or the year after that. But he said, maybe by what would be your normal senior year, that'll be your redshirt junior year, you'll get on the field. And I started adding up years, and I said, I won't be around here by that time. I'll be gone. Somebody will have whipped me so bad I won't be able to survive. So I said, I'm wasting your time and mine. So I went back to Atlanta. And as I said, grew up in Athens and Atlanta, and all of our family had gone to the University of Georgia, so that was the easy way for me to get in. And I got into the speech communication group because I was working full time, and I could not get into the journalism school. My GPA was not good enough, because you had to have a really good GPA. And then I kind of got into it with one of their grad assistants. You know, when you're young, guys, sometimes you make mistakes and you say things you wish you wouldn't have had, but I did. I was in a class after I'd been in radio for 3 or 4 years, and I was writing in the Athens newspaper. I spent 2 years there with the newspaper. And so I went into a class for journalism, and the young guy that came in to teach it, he starts spouting all this stuff out, and I'm sitting there and I go, wait a minute, hang on. So I raised my hand, called on me. I said, can I ask you a question? How many radio stations have you ever been in or worked in? He said, none. I said, how many television stations have you ever been in? None. I said, what about newspaper? He said, none. So everything he was teaching in the class, he had no background in. None whatsoever. Well, I was in my second year of newspaper. I'd been in radio for quite a few years by that point. And I just was frustrated, because if I was going to go in this journalism side, I was like, well, shouldn't I have teachers that actually could help? So I just happened to have a copy of the morning paper. And I just happened to be in the top fold of the newspaper with a story I had written the night before. So I got up and I said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you sit in my seat and I'll teach the class, because I know 2 of the 3 things and you don't. And I said, if you don't believe it, here's my byline. Maybe you should read me. And it was really an awful thing to do, and I shouldn't have done it. But I was so frustrated, and I walked straight down to the head of the journalism school, who became a great friend. When I made all of my moves on television, I got in touch with him to let him know where I was going. His wife taught in the speech communication school, and he said he was embarrassed that they didn't have a full-time professor to teach this class, and then it was a grad assistant. He said, you need to go to speech communication. You've already got so much more experience than our folks. And so I took that as a really nice compliment. But I had already worked pretty hard to get to that point. So I felt like, you know, he's right. So I went to speech communication. It was much easier to get that degree because I kept working. I worked all the way through college, full-time all the way through college. So that was not easy. It was not a lot of fun. I went to a lot of night school classes. But that's what I had to do to move on. So that's the reason. How's that? I know it was a long-winded answer. I didn't mean to go that long.
So after you moved on from journalism and got into speech communication, how did that help you on your path to becoming a sports broadcaster even after all of your experience?
I think it helped me a lot more because I learned some technical things about how to speak and how to use your hands when you speak, because a lot of folks don't do that properly, and how to stand behind a podium or not stand behind a podium, or what to say or not to say, or an inflection and so forth. I think it was the best thing I ever did. At one class, there was a lady who had been teaching speech for years and years and years. And she had us, I mean, she must have been 100 at that time, it seemed like, but she had something that is played in my mind almost every time I would go on the air anywhere, was a little saying, what did to do to die today at 1:45 to 2? A thing distinctly hard to say that's harder still to do. There'll be a to 2 at 20 to 2, or a rat-a-tat-tat to 2 at 2, and the rabbit will come. And so it will be done. And you sit there and you go, you got to be kidding me. I was 18, 19, 20 years old. But in your mind, and that was a warm-up for your mouth. It's amazing what that would do. And folks laugh when I tell that story, but it's true. And that dear, sweet lady had no idea that some crazy guy would think of that before he got on the air so many times. I can remember being out. Quick story out of this. I'm going to spin off a lot of stuff tonight. I was very fortunate to have things happen that happened. And I was working for ABC. Y'all probably heard of a guy named Drew Brees.
Yes.
Pretty good quarterback. He was at Purdue his senior year. Notre Dame is playing at Purdue. Notre Dame had always beaten Purdue at Purdue, but not this time. And I was working the sidelines. So I got to interview him after the game, and even during the game, ran up in the stands, and we got his mom calling a touchdown pass he threw. It was the coolest thing. But it was so neat to be at that game and interview Drew Brees. I got a picture of that somewhere. I wish I had it with me. I would have brought it. You'd have gotten a kick out of it. But to have that opportunity to be there. And for that game, a couple of names you guys may not know, but I'll give you some names that you can Google. Brent Musburger did the play-by-play for that game. Brent Musburger was one of my heroes. And to get to work a college football game with Brent Musburger was pretty cool. The guy that was the analyst was a gentleman named Dan Fouts, great quarterback with the San Diego Chargers. These are the two guys I get to work with. But then the guy producing it was the head of all the production for ABC Sports. And to get a chance to work with those folks, that was pretty awesome. So those kind of things happened, and you know, as you go along with your life, you just have to keep working for those things to happen, because they will, but you just have to work hard to get there. So I went on a tangent there, but I think that story kind of tells you a little bit of how some things just kind of happened.
Do you believe working with such legendary broadcasters helped you on your path into becoming a great broadcaster yourself? You
know, that's a great question, and I'll tell you why, for a couple of reasons. I decided I wanted to go into television because of a guy who became really my big brother. There was a guy named Bill Hartman, and he was on television in Atlanta. And I used to go watch him on the air, and everybody thought I was his little brother because, honest to Pete, if we don't look alike, it's crazy. He looks just like he should be in our family. He always has. Bill took one of his shows, and I went over, and I knew nothing about television. Sat on the set, read the teleprompter, and he said, just read through it about 2 or 3 times. That was my audition tape. And at the time, my wife and I were just dating, and she was over there with me. She walked, and she, wow, I think you might be able to do this. And I went, I hope so, because if not, I got nothing. So that was a great start because he guided me. He was just so great about helping me. And that was another person, before I made any move, I always made a phone call. I said, Bill, what do you think? And he would tell me. So, and we're still in touch. That's the other beauty. I'm still in touch with a lot of these people. Bob Goodrich, I was telling you, was the producer guy. He and I were sending texts back and forth the other day. He's now retired. But oh my gosh, to work with Bob Goodrich was just, amazing.
So you talked about your path into broadcasting. What do you recommend the students here that may be interested in getting into broadcast? Like, what do you recommend their path is?
Guys, I'm gonna tell you, that's changed so much from my day. The biggest explosion is internet, because all of the college and even pro games now that if you see them on the television, if you're even watching the television, it's really just the internet. Y'all know that from apps and so forth. So when ESPN first started doing this, all right, I'll tell you another story. When they first started doing this, and this has been a long time ago, probably 20 years ago, I had kind of moved out of the ABC stuff. I had 2 young boys, and Dad was missing a lot of stuff. It was very hard. I was the only person in the country that was a weekday sports anchor that did ABC on the weekend. There was nobody else. They never had anybody to do that. And there was a reason. It was a bear. I mean, it was really hard to do it. So I got out of that, and ESPN called and said, hey, you know these folks that are going to do this production for us, that are going to do the producing. Would you be willing to draw like about a 3 or 4 hour circle of where you would go, because we're going to try this internet thing? So I went up to Maryland. It was Central or Eastern Michigan against Maryland, and we only had about 4 cameras, where usually you might have 8 or 10 cameras. The truck was tiny. You'd go in these big production trucks in the old days that were bigger than this room, and these things were humongous. It was like a hotel on wheels, and there were 8 million people in there. This was a little bitty truck that had 3 people in it. And they said, and we don't have all the graphics, we don't have all the cameras. And I said, don't need them. We didn't need them. And it was the greatest thing, because it took me back to the radio days when I would do high school football on the radio. We didn't have anything. I ran the commercials. I had my own rundown. The guy doing analyst role really wasn't an analyst, but he was a good sponsor in town, and he just wanted to be on the radio thing. So we had him on. We didn't have a spotter. We didn't have stats. We didn't have anything. We just got on the air and did the best we could with it. So I loved it, and immediately they said, what'd you think about it? I said, y'all fit the gold mine, because this is going to be the way it's going to go. And now most of ESPN's games are done like that, not very many cameras. And it's kind of cool to see how that has evolved.
So you're also a sports writer. How did that help you with your broadcasting and your future career?
Phrasing probably would be the first thing, and to always have a good lead. I mean, your first thing that you spout out of your mouth about what the story is needs to be a hook of some kind. And folks go, what do you mean by that? And I go, well, I'll go back to one of the stories that I wrote. One of my leads was, 2 of the greatest things in life are spring and football. But when you put them together, it's ugly for those who are practicing, because it's true. But in that one lead line, that tells you everything you need to know about what the story's going to be about. But you don't forget that. So that's the hook. And you do it in different ways. You have to do it in different ways when you're on radio, if you're writing in a newspaper, which could be anything that you write now, or if you're on television, or if you're on YouTube, or whatever else channels that you're on. So that changes it. But I think that's what helped me.
Do you think for the students here, getting into sports writing would be a good thing to do if they're interested in getting into broadcasting?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because if you can write, it makes it easier to read or to ad lib. That's why radio was so great for me, because everything was ad lib. There wasn't any real copy that you read unless you were reading a little commercial or something, or the weather forecast, or if you were doing a newscast, or heaven forbid reading the obituaries. That was very tough. That way you learned to control, because it was hard to do obituaries. I'm going to tell you guys, that's hard when you're reading an obituary, because you have to do it right. But that helps you to do that. So any writing you do will make you better at being on any kind of air, or in front of people, or any other way that you need to communicate. It will make you a whole lot better, just because the fact that you know how to write, because you can write in your head too. I tell folks I write for the ear now more than the eye, because I spent 26 years in television. You can't write the same way, and there's a big difference, because how you read it is not necessarily how you say it. And I've had a hard time explaining that to some folks over the years, but I would never write for you to read in the exact same way that I would write for me to broadcast. It's different. It's different.
So this is a question from a student, Eric Brown, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, but he wants to know, what was your favorite or the biggest game you've ever broadcasted?
This is where I have an argument with my wife. In the old days, the big games took place on New Year's Day. So the Citrus Bowl, then the Rose Bowl, and the Orange Bowl were the 3 games on ABC. And those were the big games. I mean, if you got one of those games, you'd hit the jackpot. I got the Citrus Bowl one year, and my wife cried. She thought that was the coolest thing that had ever happened, to get that